You are listening to Leading the Factory Forward with your host, Lynn Friest. We share interviews with manufacturing experts and strategies for embracing the digital future, recruiting a new workforce, finding new business. Lynn is an advanced manufacturing strategist and leadership consultant who is on a mission to show manufacturing leaders how to improve their current operations while preparing for a digital future. And here's your host, Lynn Friest.
Hello, this is Lynn Friest, and welcome to episode 61 of Leading the Factory Forward. In today's episode, we're going to be talking with Paula Sparks around the things that she's learned and helped people develop around leadership. Again, in Leading the Factory Forward, our goal is to help you create a compelling vision for yourself, your teams, and your organizations. And I encourage you to visit my website and download the summary at the bottom of the podcast episode, and use that as a tool to capture notes as you start your exploration of this episode's concepts. Or to help you get started on your journey in general and to stay up to date on new episodes, please download the free worksheet, 3 Steps You Need for a More Productive Workday. In this episode, I'm going to be talking with Paula Sparks on leadership. Paula's a colleague and friend for many years, and she has a rich history in developing leaders and teams at all levels and to helping and shape organizational cultures. Today, she's going to share some of the common mistakes that she has seen and how to correct them. She'll also offer a new perspective on metrics, especially in manufacturing. We love metrics. Paula's going to talk a little about people metrics and how that can help drive your business. And then Paula will also talk about the role that curiosity plays, especially when you're taking on a new role or starting something new as a leader in an organization. And then also she's going to talk about understanding your leadership style and how that fits in other cultures. And again, you may have a local factory, but I'm guessing you deal with customers and or suppliers and other partners who could be from other cultures. So please join me in listening to what Paula has to share and how it might help you create the next step ahead in your leadership journey. Well, welcome, Paula, and thank you for joining us today on Leading the Factory Forward. We're looking forward to your perspectives on leadership and how it affects small and medium-sized leaders and leaders of any type, really. Paula, we'd like to start off by you sharing a little bit about yourself and your journey.
Thanks, Lynn. Thanks for the invitation to speak today. It's a pleasure. So my name is Paula Sparks, and I have worked for 40 years in both the federal government and a Fortune 500 company. I've worked a lot in manufacturing in both roles, and I've seen an awful lot in organizational culture and organizational leadership that I'd like to talk about today.
Great. And I know you've worked with people at all levels. I know you've worked with people who are directors, country leaders, as well as you've had experience with frontline leaders too. So you've really had all levels of leadership.
Absolutely. And there's definitely some tricks and tips on working with different leadership levels as well. So one of the things that I'd love to talk about today are common mistakes that I tend to see happen within environments in the workplace today. I will talk about manufacturing specifically. I have had a lot of exposure to manufacturing, especially in teaching different leadership development programs associated with manufacturing leaders and employees. One of the things that I've noticed is when we look at manufacturing today, you always have metrics, whether they're safety, whether they're looking at quality metrics. But one of the things that I see is it's not necessarily people metrics. So I'd like you to think through that for me on what would that look like to have people metrics. Let me give you a couple different ideas. If you have a vision statement, a mission statement, a core values type statement, what are the behaviors associated with those statements that you can start to role model as the behaviors that you want to see more of in your leadership today? So regardless of where you are in the leadership levels in your organization, do you know what those behaviors are? Are you measured on those behaviors? Some companies have performance management type systems where they get feedback from their managers on how well they're doing, not only in the hard metrics, but also in the soft metrics, more the people skills metrics. I am curious to know, do you have those in your organization? If not, what would it look like to develop some? So what are the key values, the key behaviors rather, that you look for in your employees? If you were to assess your company culture, what are the behaviors that really work? What are the behaviors that don't that you want to shift? I'm a huge advocate on tweaking. I think tweaking is a lot easier than saying something is really broken and you have to fix it. So what are the behaviors that you might need to tweak? in your organization to get more of the productivity that you want, to create more of the culture that you want.
Sounds good. What other things, as you think about those behaviors, could you give us a couple of examples of behaviors?
Absolutely. When you look at blind spots, oftentimes what gets people into trouble are their blind spots. Certain behaviors that they have, whether it's their tone of voice, whether it's the rapid pace of their voice, whether it's not setting enough context before you ask questions, so you might come across as too direct. Those are the types of things that often get people in trouble. In the virtual world that we work in today, if you're not having a call where you can see someone's face and you're only relying on email, you can really get into trouble there because you can't tell the tonality of your voice, especially if you don't have a rapport built with your people.
So, Paula, could you give us a couple of examples of what a people metric would look like?
Yeah. So part of it is looking at how are people developing? What kind of development do you have for your people so that they can work on not only the technical skills, but also the soft skills? Do you have leadership development style programs? Do you have small workshops that you give your employees on things that you want to see them work on? For example, pieces of emotional intelligence. What's their level of self-awareness? What's their level of emotional regulation? Using tools like a 360 tool. Perhaps you have a feedback type tool in your company that you can use. That's a really great tool to see how often do employees use those. So that way they can understand their blind spots, they can work on development for themselves, and it'll help them be more successful in the long run.
I can think of two that I know in some of the conversations I've had around manufacturing leaders, especially in smaller companies, saying, don't take all the work on yourself. And I think you would agree, you can have people work with peers and things like that. So it's not always all up to the leader to provide development.
Absolutely. You can have reverse mentoring. You can have peer mentoring. You can have small coaching segments where people give each other feedback. You can make it into team building workshops where you can have some fun with it. You can have snowball fights with balls of paper and talk about behaviors that you've noticed in the organization that you want to change. And how do you take personal responsibility for that? What does that look like? So there's a lot of different ways, you're right, Lynn, on being able to work on those. It's not just all on the leader. I would say, though, as a leader, people are watching you. People are watching how you react, how you behave, how you speak. And so if you don't think you're being watched, it's kind of surprising sometimes to people when they realize, oh my goodness, people are really looking at my behavior and role modeling my behavior. So is it the behavior that I really want in the company?
Right. Absolutely. Another thing, and I know you've touched on this in the past, is, the culture is the set of conversations. And I think you've already kind of alluded to that as a leader, you can pay attention to what are the conversations that are normally happening in our organization.
Absolutely. And along with that, it's also looking at your words become mandates. So even if you're just thinking out loud on something, I have a tendency, that's my style. I tend to think out loud and then I formulate ideas from that. If you're that type of a leader, you got to be really careful because you need to follow up by saying, I'm not expecting you to do this. I'm just thinking out loud. This isn't a mandate. So looking at the different types of conversations that happen in the organization, absolutely, you need to be mindful of that and what your style is.
Well, I've even seen it interesting as to how you design meetings. What are the top topics? Kind of reflect what are the top real metrics or real important things for a meeting.
Absolutely. When I think about how often do meetings skip ground rules? So if you're establishing a brand new team, I do recommend having some ground rules. What are the guidelines we're going to follow? Making sure that someone takes notes, that you end 5 minutes earlier so that way you can capture the X by Ys on whatever the meeting is. So that way you have real output. Looking at everyone has a voice. So you want to hear from each person, even if it means taking the time to pause and saying, I haven't heard from you. What do you think? Even if it's a call, maybe not a physical meeting. It's also being mindful of assuming good intent. So making sure that there isn't doubt, or if someone wants to play a devil's advocate, they're not doing it to be mean. They're doing it because they want to challenge the group in a different way of thinking. Appreciating diversity of thought. All of those types of things are really important to set up in a meeting, and oftentimes people don't have them. So that way the meeting rehashes the same things over and over again. There's questions all the time that don't get answered. Information isn't captured, so people who miss the meeting want a replay of everything all over again, and it's not productive, and it's really a time waster. Another topic that I'd like you to explore is how curious are you? When you first start a new job, we're really curious. We want to be able to understand how do meetings get done? How do I navigate the organization? Who are my allies? Who are the people that I need to build relationships with? Who are my influencers in the organization? We're really curious. Sometimes when we stay in a job for a long period of time, the curiosity wanes. So how do you build more curiosity? What are the things that you're hearing about in the industry that you want to learn more about? What are the new rules around different aspects of manufacturing, whether it's safety or quality, different standards that are being set? How familiarized are you with those? How much do you benchmark other companies to be able to understand what are their best practices? How often do you even just Google that? There's so much stuff out on Google now. You can find it without even having to go to a company. Looking at change. How often are you shifting change in the organization that's healthy change, not just change for change's sakes? But if you looked at, for example, what are the 3 things that you need to change about yourself? How do you work on those for yourself? How do you leverage relationships in the organization of people who are really good in those areas that can help you fill those gaps? I realize that also means you have to be humble because it's admitting I'm not really good in this area. I want to grow. I want to learn. I do think that's healthy. And I also think that that's really good for the organization to see that you don't claim to know it all. Curiosity is a really strong characteristic. There's also a piece of this around wanting to learn from others. I remember I had a leadership development program and I had a participant who, when people introduced themselves around the circle, literally she made a comment, "I want to learn from you." And I thought, wow, what a powerful comment to be made. Well, what I really was impressed with her about is at lunch, she slid her chair over to the individual and she said, "Okay, I'm ready for my lesson." So it's not just a casual comment on, "Oh, wow, that's really interesting. I want to learn from you." It's really following up and doing what you say you're going to do by taking that curiosity another step so that you can learn. Development is a huge deal when you look at leadership skills. So what are you doing to develop yourself? What are you doing to grow? What are you curious about? How do you explore those curiosities? And sometimes it means being able to have some reverse mentoring by learning from different generations in the workplace, whether it's older or younger, being able to say, okay, there's a lot of things that I don't really know, and I want to learn from you on those things. Will you teach me? You're not going to have many people say no. Obviously, they're flattered that you're asking. And so being able to be open to learn from others is a huge characteristic that I do see people tend to miss as they grow in their role in the organization. They lose that curiosity.
I think, also in terms of manufacturing with the advance of technology, clearly as leaders, probably we are not the cutting edge knowledge and technology. So we truly do have to depend on others, often people younger in the organization. I've often encouraged people to find the younger and even more curious people, and they can help you learn the technology.
Absolutely. I remember I was in Brazil for a training program and everyone was using an app called WhatsApp. I hadn't heard of it before. And one of the individuals in the team that I was working with just grabbed my phone, installed the app, set it up with relationships with him and the other people in the office. And it was great. He gave me a mini little lesson and I was running. So I agree. You can learn from anywhere. It's just having that curiosity and that openness to be willing to learn from other people. And plus, if you look at it from building relationships, we can always use more relationships. We can use more networks. And when you look at the size of your network, if it's really insular, it's just you and your team, I would encourage you to broaden that out and say, okay, what can I learn from some of the other people in this organization to build stronger relationship? Not only because it helps build your network and it helps you grow, but also when you need help in the future, when you have that network, it's a lot easier to ask for help. It's kind of like a bank account. You're putting money in the bank by investing in someone else. Likewise, people invest in you. And when they ask for help, you readily say yes because you already have a relationship with them. So being able to build relationship is always a good thing in an organization.
Another thing that occurs to me, Paula, is as you talk about curiosity, I guess the flip side or maybe the darker side of it is when people feel they have certainty or they're not willing to question the assumptions that they've made in life or in business. And so I think curiosity would also help those traps too.
Absolutely. Well, and plus, nobody really likes a know-it-all. Think about when you were in school as a child and you always had that person who raised their hand all the time. Ooh, I know the answer. When you come into a new job, when you're shifting careers, that's a perfect time to be curious and give yourself grace. Oftentimes people go through the imposter syndrome. Ooh, I hope nobody figures out I don't really know what I'm doing. We all go through that, by the way. But oftentimes what happens is some people put it on steroids and it stays longer. So they don't want to appear like they don't know, which is dangerous. It's easier just to say, you know what? I want to learn from you. I know pieces of this, but I don't know other pieces. Can you help me? Whatever helps you feel comfortable asking for help, I would encourage it because it's also a great leadership skill. Oftentimes leaders don't have that level of humility to admit it, that they don't know something. And I think it's impressive to employees when we are more humble.
Yeah, and I would agree. Certainly my own experience and others, especially when we're new to leadership, we feel like, well, they hired me because I know stuff. And so it's hard to ask for help when I think they hired me because I was supposed to already know this.
Exactly. One of the lessons that I've learned, especially in international travel, when you have a company where you have a larger manufacturing footprint and you have factories in different areas, it's really important to understand the culture of the country that you're going to and to be open to shift your style. So this is about developing yourself to realize one size does not fit all. Just like when we manage our employees, we realize some of our employees are visual learners. Some we have to explain it over and over again. Sometimes they write it down. Sometimes they don't. They have different styles. There's different styles when you think about culture. I remember I had an experience in the company that I used to work for where I was asked to go live in India and set up training operations. Amazing experience. Right before I went, the manager that I had at the time said, okay, Paula, I want you to have a 360 and I want you to pick people who don't like you. Now, often what happens is when you pick a feedback tool, you usually pick your friends. Oh, they're going to say I'm wonderful and I'm great and I don't have anything that I need to work on. And in this case, I chose people that I had run-ins with. And so, boy, when I got the feedback, they really didn't like me. But one of the things that I learned was my style did not work with a lot of the individuals that I chose. To the point where I even remember some of the feedback was, your words push people up against the walls. And I thought, that's pretty painful. Okay, good to know. I never want someone to feel that way. And what I realized is I worked with the federal government. I worked with supporting the Army. So I was used to a very direct communication style. I worked in multiple functional areas in the company that I moved to, and the communication styles differed according to different functional areas. And what I realized is I needed to not be so direct. So setting more context on asking questions, not just saying, why are we doing it this way? This doesn't make sense. That can come across as very abrasive to a lot of individuals. And so being able to shift my style. Well, it was perfect timing for moving to India. What I didn't realize is direct communication style does not work. It's very indirect. It's very tell a story, set more context on why you're asking before you make the comments, which was brilliant of my manager to recommend that I had it. Even though it felt a little painful being able to get some of that feedback, it was very helpful when I lived in India because it was about building relationship. It was about taking time to get to know the individuals, not just getting right to business. When I started a meeting, it was, asking about cricket or asking about their families, not taking the whole meeting, of course, but just a few minutes here and there to work on building relationships before I just dove right into whatever the topic was. What was really an eye-opener for me, though, is when I came back to the U.S. for a short break, and I met with individuals in the U.S. office to ask them some benchmarking questions about training. And I watched some of those meetings be a replay of how I used to be. A person came into the meeting. They didn't introduce themselves. They said, what do you want? What do you need? They gave me the information I needed, and they left. And I sat there thinking, wow, that was the coldest meeting I've ever had in my entire life. And then I realized, oh my goodness, that's what I used to be like. So I was really working on shifting my style to fit the culture that I was working in. So I went back to India and realized, wow, I really have changed overall my style. Now, when I'm in the classroom and I'm talking to people about things that they need to work on, I can be very direct all over again. But when I'm working on building relationships, building a team, I'm really mindful of style shifting. So you travel from India to, say, China, to Brazil, to Germany, to Canada, to different countries. They all have different styles. And so it's understanding and observing what's the style that really works here, and then shifting your style to fit it. I'm not asking for people to lose themselves. You still want to be authentic, But you also want to be mindful, especially of tone of voice, especially of pace. I remember as I was in India, I was teaching a class and I asked for feedback in the middle of the class. And one of the people said, "Your accent is so strong, Paula. I can't understand you." And I said, "Okay, what do I need to do?" "Well, slow down. Don't talk quite so fast." "Okay, great. I can do that." So it's being mindful of that and being able to shift your style. I do think the cultural nuances are important. There's a book that I highly recommend. It's called Kiss, Bow, or Shake Hands. It's a pretty good sized book. You can also get it as an ebook or even listen to it. But what I like about it is it does give the nuances on when you go to a country. Here's the things you need to know. Another story about India. I'm at the factory and I'm realizing not a lot of the people on the floor have really worked with a white woman before. And so I put my hand out to shake hands and I found people looked at me like, "I'm not shaking your hand. That's not what we do here." And I thought, "Oh my goodness, what do I do?" And someone gave me some coaching. I asked the question, "Okay, what should I have done?" I automatically went to a namaste pose and that bought me a little bit of time until I could learn the protocol and the etiquette. If I was perceived as younger than the individual, I was to lean over and touch their feet. And that's a way of respect. Didn't know that. Now, if you read in Kiss, Bow, Shake Hands, it talks about that. So it's just being mindful of the cultural differences and the cultural nuances.
Well, and, even though many of these smaller, medium-sized companies may not have multinational footprints, they do have multinational supply chains. And so I can appreciate how, as I've run into small companies, it's amazing how far-flung their supply chains are, their customer base. These are the kinds of ideas that can really help them as they deal with, a global supply chain, I would think.
Absolutely. Another thing about that too is being mindful of email style. So it's not just shifting style communication wise when you're speaking, but also when you're writing. I remember I was getting ready to teach class. I'm going to refer to India again because I learned a lot of lessons about this from that. I was getting ready to teach a class and a woman came into the class and she said, "What is it with you people?" And I thought, well, Magda, tell me. And she said, "You Americans, you're bossy. You just tell me what to do." And I said, "Well, tell me more." "I got this email. Do this." There is no, "Hi, Magda. How are you? I hope your family is great. Can you please help me with this? Thank you so much. Kind regards," with the person's name. And I thought, oh my goodness, I do that. I might say, "Hi, Lynn. I hope you're doing great." But then I'm going to ask you what I need and give you a date on when I need it by. And there's no real pleasantries in the email. And that was a big lesson for me because I asked Magda, okay, how should I be writing an email? And that's the example that she gave. And I used this in training that I did around the world. And the only country that gave me grief about it was Germany. That's too much fluff. You don't need all that extra stuff. Just say, what do you need and how to get it done? So again, being mindful of the different culture, being mindful of the different communication style that works. What's ironic about that story, however, is that communication style, acknowledging the person, hoping that they're doing well. If you know anything about them, asking how they're doing before you get into business, that works everywhere. And so it taught me a very valuable lesson. It was probably a 5-minute conversation with Magda, but it stuck with me from that point forward in my career.
That's great, Paula, because that makes me think of, certainly international culture is one issue, but I know in manufacturing, we're including a lot more and a lot more diverse people in our manufacturing work these days. So even within the U.S., we're now reaching out to underserved populations, where people who are not like the traditional factory people. And so we need to be mindful of their differences in speech patterns, their differences in what they're expecting from us. And of course, we have to learn to lose our jargon because that confuses everybody. But
Absolutely. I was just going to talk about that, actually, the whole acronym piece. In fact, even as you look at your CV, your resume, is it full of acronyms? Because a lot of people don't know what that acronyms are if you don't spell them out. Another piece of that is cognitive diversity. So sure, there's ethnic diversity, there's gender diversity, but there's also how people think differently. And a very powerful question that I encourage people to use when they're first starting out a team is, what do I need to know about you to work with you? It's very powerful. I do find a lot of people have a question mark on their face, like, well, what are you getting at, Paula? So I usually start and I'll make a joke about it, but I'm serious. I'll say, I think Excel is an evil tool. If you like Excel, it's all yours. Yes, I could create pivot tables. Yes, I could work in Excel if I really had to. but it's really not where my strengths are. So if you love Excel on this team, any Excel work, it's all yours. I'll joke about it, but I'm serious. It's really not my strength. It's not an area that I really love to spend time doing. But it's a nice question because it helps set the stage then on how do you want to be approached as you get to know people, being able to understand topics that are safe topics to talk with them about in order to build relationship. Very important.
Another thing that occurs to me as you'd mentioned that is that, again, my experience in manufacturing, it was always helpful to learn more about people because they're not just their job title or whatever. So if I was in a group, it's not just an engineer, a supervisor, a welder, or assembler. I mean, those people may be leading youth soccer leagues. They may be leading nonprofits. They may be doing all kinds of things outside of the work that are really the gifts that they have. And we often won't even know anything about them because we just pigeonhole them.
Absolutely. Even in building a relationship and starting conversations with people, another powerful question can sound like, tell me about yourself, and making it broad on purpose. I remember talking with a director one time, walking with him down a hallway in the building I used to work in. And I started that way. Tell me about yourself. And he said, what do you want to know? And I said, well, I left it broad on purpose. You can go anywhere with that question. Tell me about your family. Tell me about work. Tell me about things you love to do. Anything is open. Pick anything. Another thing about that is also being able to ask a question around what makes you special. I remember I was on a plane one day. I flew a lot in my previous job, and I was sitting next to a father and son on the plane. I was sitting in the aisle, and I noticed that he was reading a book on emotional intelligence. And I was reading that same book. It's called EQ 2.0 when it first came out. And I was asking him some questions. Well, what do you like about the book? What are the things that you've learned about the book? And so I'm just starting it. I said, okay. And I said, well, I work in leadership development, organizational development. I try to help companies be more thoughtful about leadership styles. And so I asked him, what makes you special? And he says, well, I am not sure what makes me special. And so I kind of pivoted a little bit. And I said, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? And he says, I want to be a manager. I said, well, why do you want to be a manager? Well, because managers make a lot of money. And I said, okay. And the guy in the middle was chuckling at some of these conversations as well. But I kept focused on the younger man that was sitting next to the window. And I said, well, can I give you a little bit of advice on things that I look for in managers and leaders? And I talked about the ability to flip a switch every day to be your best self. So looking at how often are you taking care of others and you're not just focused on yourself? So do you look for gaps and fill them automatically without having to be asked? Do you volunteer your time to help out somebody that you know is struggling with something? And instead of just thinking, well, it's their problem, it's not mine. How often are you taking care of other people? Because when I see that, that shows me that you have a lot of leadership potential because you're focused on more than just yourself. You're not being selfish. You're not being all about yourself. And that's a big deal. So I talked a little bit about that. I talked about what does make you special. What are the things that you love to do, love to spend time on, that you get lost in? When you get lost in different things and you lose track of time, that really helps you understand what your specialties are, what does make you special. And then I would encourage you, look for jobs where you get to do those things on a regular basis. So for example, I'm not good at math. Math is a four-letter word to me. I'm not good at it. I would not do well in some sort of a mathematical job. That's not where I'm going to thrive. That's not what makes me special. If I can be more in a creative space where I can look at building a strategy for a company or looking at building culture, looking at what culture is broken, what needs to be fixed, looking at change and transition, helping people transition in different phases of their life. That's the type of stuff that makes me lose track of time because it's really enjoyable. So I shared all those things with this young man, and then the conversation had a natural end. And so he put on his headsets and he started listening to some music. And the gentleman right next to me said, "Thank you so much for talking to my son. I've been working on this with him for years, and I can guarantee you he listened to you more intently than he's listened to me the entire time. I've told him basically the same things, but thank you so much for doing that." And I thought, can we all be that for each other? Can we all, help each other figure out what makes us special? How do we work on different areas of our life? How do we figure out what we want to be when we grow up?
Absolutely. Anything else you'd like to share?
One of the things that I'm working on right now is looking at transitions in life. There are a lot of companies that are shifting, downsizing, right-sizing, reorganizing, whatever you want to call it. But what it does is it leaves people in a state of feeling lost. So if you find that your company is downsizing and your job's been eliminated, how do you work on recreating your identity? Sometimes our identity is all about work. It's not just about other factors in our life. So how do you work on that? How do you advertise yourself? How do you brand yourself? How do you market yourself? How do you make sure that your resume isn't so specific that it looks like you can only do one kind of job? How do you broaden it out a little bit more? How are you dealing with the emotions associated with a job loss? So oftentimes it can leave people feeling angry or some bitterness there. So how do you work on that? How do you work on forgiveness? It's kind of like taking the rearview mirror out of the car. You just got to move forward. You can't turn around and look back. How do you work on that? I'm working on building a workshop around that right now. And I anticipate I'll be putting something on LinkedIn about it so that if people are curious to be able to sign up for it, that might be a possibility.
Great. And we'll have your email link in the show notes and stuff. And is there any other way, I guess, LinkedIn, any other ways that you can be contacted?
My email is primary. So being able to just contact me on email works great.
Okay. Well, Paula, thank you very much. We talked about metrics, we talked about curiosity, and we talked about leadership style. 3 great topics. And I appreciate your help on this and how you shared this with our audience. So again, many thanks.
Very good. Thanks so much, Lynn. I appreciate the invitation. And everyone, be your best self.
Great. Thanks, Paula. Well, again, my thanks to Paula for sharing her experiences with us. As a quick recap, we talked about some of the common mistakes she has seen leaders make and how to correct them, a new perspective on metrics, especially people metrics, the role that curiosity can play in taking on a new role as a leader, and finally, understanding your leadership style and how it fits in with other cultures or other leadership styles that people have. Again, our many thanks to Paula for her insights. So what's up next? We're going to continue a mix of solo episodes and interviews with experts, some in manufacturing, but also some in areas that can help you build your business and your personal leadership. Also, in the last episode of the month, I'm going to be sharing my thoughts and ideas on becoming a silver entrepreneur or just a person who wants to develop their next professional endeavor in life. Finally, I once again encourage you to visit my website and download the summary at the bottom of the podcast episode as you start your exploration of this episode's concepts. And to help you get started on your journey and to stay up to date on new episodes, please download the free worksheet, 3 Steps You Need for a More Productive Workday. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.